I want to thank all of you to being here today on behalf of the United States Helsinki Commission. This hearing comes at a critical time for the people of Ukraine in the urgent defense against war criminal Putin's genocidal invasion. Ukrainians continue courageously to fight for their lives, their families, and their homeland. As we speak, war criminal Putin is relentlessly attacking Kharkiv with a population of 1.5 million innocent civilians. The need for a vital air defense and long-range munitions has never been more dire. I am grateful that President Biden has provided long-range missiles, but Ukraine must be able to legitimately defend itself from attacks launched from within the borders of the Russian Federation. We have seen a clear and repeated pattern with Putin attacks. The mass murdering Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad welcomed Putin's involvement to quash the Syrian revolution of 2015. Putin atrocities committed against innocent Syrians are being replicated to murder innocent Ukrainians, including chemical weapons and incendiary munitions. War criminal Putin is also known for the double tap strikes, which gruesomely target emergency personnel, medical personnel, police, fire, and volunteers as they search for survivors following the first round of attacks. The once vibrant city of Aleppo in Syria had a population of 2.5 million people before it was decimated to rubble by war criminal Putin and Assad. This was done also in Mariupol, sadly, where the once vibrant population of 500,000 people, now war criminal Putin threatens Kharkiv, the population of the second largest city of Ukraine of 1.5 million people, which historically at one time was the capital of Ukraine and has so many beautiful historical artifacts and indications such as the beautiful Orthodox churches and libraries and museums and universities. And we sadly know the intent of war criminal Putin is to create total rubble, which is inconceivable in the 21st century of targeting civilian targets. With Speaker Mike Johnson's leadership, I am grateful for the passage of the significant support for Ukraine. Now it's time to expedite what Ukraine needs and remove arbitrary restrictions that tie the hands of the Ukrainian defenders. Make no mistake, without shortages and delays, Ukrainian victory could have already become a reality. But Europe also should be recognized for being fully engaged in Ukraine, as America is 16th in order of aid per gross domestic product. We are behind Lithuania, Bulgaria, Latvia, Poland, Romania. With military aid to Ukraine back online, there is renewed hope that we can ensure that every assistance package to Ukraine matters and is tied very specifically to Ukrainian victory with the defeat of war criminal Putin and his thugs. We have with us today, and I appreciate that Congressman Veasey found it right away, and this is a fragment of a Russian Kalaba cruise missile, which was fired upon the homes of innocent Ukrainians in the city of Kherson shortly after it was liberated by Ukrainian forces in late 2022. I want to pass this around to our colleagues to have a closer look and be careful. Indeed, it's jagged portions to it, edges. The cost of one of the Kalibr missiles is over $7 million. $7 million. Fired purposely at Ukrainian civilians simply for existing as Ukrainians. That is the enemy that Ukraine is facing, one that is so invested in their physical, cultural, and political destruction that they will spend enormous sums to build advanced weapons of war by the Putinists to rain down on Ukrainian families. When they run out, they're supplied by a terrorist regime in Tehran and the maniacal regime of Kim Jong-un of DPRK, North Korea. Clearly, with war criminal Putin in Beijing today, the axis of evil has never been clearer, of dictators of rule of gun invading democracies with rule of law. War criminal Putin comes up with false excuse every day for his mass murder to further his expansionist goals. His August 2021 treatise was clear, and that is he believes that and wants to ensure that Ukraine does not exist as he attempts to recreate the evil empire of the Soviet Union. Last May, while I was in Berlin, I was really disturbed and shocked to see the massive Russian embassy there. And it still has on top of it a hammer and sickle. And to me, that's the equivalent of having a swastika. And so the thought that there would be the existence of a hammer and sickle is amazing. And we must face reality. Despite enormous casualties and equipment losses, Russia continues to press on with a full war economy while oppressing the people of Russia itself. Ukrainian victory will happen, not because Putin comes to his senses, but when Ukraine has achieved clear military superiority in their country, diminishing Russian ability to wage war effectively, and establishing territorial integrity. Every aid package should be tied to the objective of territorial integrity. I now yield to Congressman Marc Veasey of Texas.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I appreciate that and glad that we're having these hearings and glad to see that you are steadfast and non-wavering in your commitment to maintaining freedom in Europe. I really wish that everyone would go back and listen to Ronald Reagan's entire speech when he said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall, because people hear that part of the speech, but they forget about what was the contents of the speech. And he talked about the checkpoints. He talked about people's lack of freedom. People forget that literally in East Germany, they had an organization known as the Stasi that spied on people, that spied on its own citizens. And if they would do things like politically gather and protest, they would keep secret files on these people. And we know that countries that do things like that are evil, and that countries that spy on their own people are bad. And I really wish that people could go back and just, again, listen to the contents of that speech, because it was talking about America's unwavering commitment to freedom and democracy in Europe, and that's important. One of the things that I wish that the president would do is talk more about the fact that energy, because of the record amount of oil and gas that President Biden has produced, more than his predecessor, it's helped keep Europe and it's helped keep Putin at bay. This would be a lot worse. If you want to stop death and destruction and you want to really squeeze Putin, let him not be able to control the flow of energy in Europe. And right now he's not. He thought he was going to be able to. He thought that there was going to be one harsh winter and that was going to be it. And it didn't happen. And we should be grateful for that, because it could have been a lot worse. It could have been a lot worse. And so we need to continue having conversations about that. If we can squeeze Putin without having to squeeze U.S. triggers ultimately, then that is a good thing. And in closing, and Joe and I have been to several of the Helsinki meetings and the winter meetings that they have annually in Vienna, and of course the other meetings that they do in the summer that moves from different European countries. The officials and the people of the PMs in those countries and the electeds in those countries and the business leaders in those countries, they want to know that our country is committed to maintaining peace and prosperity in Europe. They want to know that we're committed to making sure that this does not spread beyond Ukraine. Because if we don't stop Putin now, and this spreads beyond Ukraine, and it goes into Romania, and it goes into Estonia, we're going to have a lot more bloodshed, and there won't be anything that anybody can do about it. So we need to make sure that this is the end. And when Joe and I go to Europe this summer, I want to be able to tell those officials that we're going to meet with in Romania that we are committed to making sure that it does not go whether for any administration, that it stops now, that this is it, and that we are committed to making sure that Ukraine can defend itself against this unlawful invasion, and that they can continue to experience and get back to having peace and prosperity and rebuilding that country. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back, and thank you for putting this hearing together today.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Congressman Veasey. We now have as the witnesses today, we have Nataliya Bugayova, the non-resident fellow of the Institute of War. Additionally, I'm grateful we have Ambassador John Herbst, who is the Senior Director of the Atlantic Council, and we also have Michael Ryan, who is the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense. And so each one of you are welcome to be here today, and it's wonderful that we have free speech for Nataliya to begin. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman, and thanks for the opportunity to be here and contribute to the discussion. I will start by saying that the battlefield situation will likely get worse for Ukraine before it gets better. Russia is exploiting vulnerabilities across the entire front line, in large part because of the delays in Western aid. The Kremlin's main objective is to convince the U.S. that the U.S. aid will not make a difference, especially as we approach critical milestones such as NATO summit and the U.S. elections. In our assessment, Ukraine, however, will be able to stabilize the front line and to blunt the incoming Russian offensive as the aid arrives. Where we go from there and whether Ukraine is on the path to victory depends in large part on whether U.S. learns critical lessons from the last 2 years of this war. And I would like to focus on two larger points in this respect. The first one is that U.S. interests and the most advantageous outcome for the U.S. in this war remains the same. Russia is a self-declared adversary to the U.S., and any effective U.S. strategy to counter this challenge will recognize that the outcome of this war is the center of gravity of Russia's power and its ability to threaten our interests. Russia's ability to reconstitute, to confront NATO, to contribute militarily to its partners like Iran, it all depends disproportionately on whether Russia keeps or loses its gains in Ukraine. But it's not just about capability. It is also about the intent. This war has empowered a nationalist community inside of Russia that believes in the expansion by force, and it's inherently anti-Western. If Russia is defeated in Ukraine, the next after Putin may or may not be worse. If Russia prevails in Ukraine, the next after Putin will most certainly be like Putin or worse because of the political imperatives that this empowered nationalist community will generate. Given these realities, the most dangerous outcome for the U.S. is allowing Russia to win this war. The risk of Russia-NATO war will rise exponentially, and U.S. will face a reconstituted Russia that is also more determined to undermine the U.S. In an alternative scenario in which Russia gets reprieve on the battlefield, either as a result of a premature ceasefire or insufficient Western aid, that outcome is still far more costly for the United States than helping Ukraine to continue to fight. Because in this case, Russia will have ability to rebuild and attack Ukraine again, which means U.S. will face the same problem under worse escalation risk, higher costs, and conditions that favor Russia. Therefore, the most advantageous outcome for Ukraine, for the U.S. remains helping Ukraine liberate its territory and its people as the only path to an actual durable peace and not a temporary respite, and then helping rebuild Ukraine and putting the largest combat-capable friendly military at the forefront of the NATO's defense. As long as this outcome remains Ukraine's choice, the most prudent U.S. strategy is helping Ukraine actually achieve it. Which brings me to the second issue. What will it take at this point to reset Ukraine on the path to victory? And I'd like to highlight a couple of key requirements. The first one, after Ukraine stabilizes the lines, the priority should be helping Ukraine restore ability to maneuver on the battlefield. This will require a lot more of ground-based long-range strike capabilities. Second, we must deny Russia sanctuaries. Russia is not entitled to sanctuaries when it's trying to erase a nation. Right now, as we speak, Russian Air Force is conducting glide bomb attacks from Russia's airspace sanctuary on Kharkiv, and it can do so indefinitely, as my colleague George Baer has written this week. We must abandon the Russian information line that Russia can somehow demand an immunity from being attacked when it's waging an unprovoked war. We must remove any existing constraints on Ukraine to target Russian legitimate military and defense industrial capabilities inside of Russia. This is critical if we're actually serious in imposing strategic costs on Russia across the board. The third is that we must really think beyond the standard force ratios and focus on asymmetries. The Ukraine's effort in the Black Sea is a quintessential example of an effort producing outsized effects that Kremlin, by the way, is going out of its way trying to downplay. With more resource, this effort can have even larger effects, including on the ground war. Other asymmetric opportunities include helping Ukraine scale its rapid innovation through essentially helping Ukraine scale its rapid innovation and helping Ukraine's defense industrial base reach its potential. Ukraine's Ministry of Strategic Industry estimates that Ukraine has 10 billion in additional production capacity if properly resourced. The final points I'll mention is that we also must surge our own capacity. Figuring out how to creatively allocate resources that we have while gradually aiding capability is important, but that's not the main problem that we need to solve. The US needs to lead a global coalition of partners in Europe and Asia to dramatically increase the overall stack of capabilities that matter in Ukraine, but they will also matter for our own ability to deter and fight future wars. Look, the combined GDP of US, our European partners, our Asian allies, is on the order of 63 trillion. Russia's GDP is around 1.9 trillion. Iran and North Korea add little. China is an enabler of Russia, but it hasn't mobilized. And if we mobilize and lean in, Russia loses. And mobilizing means not just surging production, sparing more of the existing capabilities, but also accepting the higher threshold for pain and risk now to avoid more risk, more cost, and higher pain in the future. The final point I'll make is that the US should also recognize that the speed of decision-making has been a critical, at times the most critical factor in this war. The key successes of Ukraine and its partners in this war have resulted from strategic clarity, and lost opportunities have resulted from inability to connect the ground truth to our interests and capabilities fast enough to act. The front line would look different now had the US proactively invested in Ukraine's initiative in winter of 2023 or passed the supplemental earlier. Russia learned that lesson very early, so much so that Russia's entire strategy for the last 2 years has been focused on deterring and delaying US decision-making. We should learn that lesson too and recognize that we should plan to proactively resource multiple Ukraine's campaigns, not expecting any single operation to have decisive outcome. The US should also expand its knowledge sharing with Ukrainian partners, including growing physical presence in Ukraine, to connect the ground truth to our decision faster, recognizing that the outcome of this war depends as much on our decision-making speed as it does on the military capability. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Bugayova. And I told y'all, I'm correct again, that the ranking member, Steve Cohen, would be here. Now, I didn't realize he was going to be bringing his fan club with him, too. But that's proof of his effectiveness, and so that he would attract such a crowd. And with this in mind, Ambassador, we'll proceed. And what we'll do, everybody at 5 minutes, and then so that we can have and even the politicians are going to be held to 5 minutes, and Stephanie Pendarvis is going to make sure that the timing is correct. But as we proceed, thank you, Ambassador.
With Nataliya. Okay. The greatest national security challenge that we face is the partnership of aggressive authoritarian regimes seeking to undermine our global leadership. The larger, longer-range threat, of course, is China with a real economy. But the greatest short-term danger comes from our peer nuclear power, Russia, which is conducting a savage war of conquest to subjugate Ukraine in Europe and would like to restore control at a minimum over all the territory of the former Soviet Union, which happens to include 3 NATO allies. Ukraine is the place where we can and must deal a decisive blow to our adversaries. If we help Kyiv defeat Putin in Ukraine, we prevent further Russian aggression to the West and send a cautionary message to Xi to lay off Taiwan. It would also make it harder for Moscow to enable further Iranian aggression in the Middle East, a key factor in Hamas's assault on Israel and the Houthis' attacks on global shipping. What does this mean for U.S. policy now that Congress has passed the aid bill? First, the administration must identify what is at stake in Ukraine, clearly. The problem is not a war in Ukraine, but a nuclear power seeking to subjugate Ukraine and then to move further west. Two things flow from this. First, we need a policy of containment for Russia, a position endorsed by representatives from 10 think tanks here on Capitol Hill in early February. The place, again, to defeat and contain Moscow is Ukraine, a large country fighting for its right to live free as proud Ukrainians. Stopping Moscow there does not involve American soldiers. If our need is to contain and defeat Russia so that we can enjoy a free society allowing people like that who don't understand but have a clear point of view to speak, yes. So, providing $40 billion a year in aid to Russia, to Ukraine, is not a gift to Ukraine. It is the smart way to defend the United States, to defend our security, our prosperity, and it represents roughly 4% or less of our defense budget. That's first. We need to understand we have a problem containing this nuclear rogue power. Secondly, we need a clear power towards Moscow's war on Ukraine. The administration has frequently said we would stay with Ukraine as long as it takes. That's not good enough. We need a clear signal to defeat Russia to enable victory in Ukraine, for Ukraine. What does this look like? The first order of business is to enhance Ukraine's defensive line so Russia does not add to the incremental gains when American military aid was in doubt. They are right now bombarding Kharkiv, 30 kilometers from Ukraine's border with Russia. They are also making incremental gains around Kharkiv. Lately, the administration has moved smartly to get ammunition and artillery to Ukraine, but it needs to do much more to protect Kharkiv and other Ukrainian cities, Ukrainian critical energy infrastructure from Moscow's massive aerial assault. This means more air defense systems, Patriots and French SAM-Ts. Ukraine has 3 Patriot batteries. They need at least 9 more. Our allies, some of them can help fill this void. There's a second dimension to this problem, coming from American reluctance until mid-last year to back sending of F-16s to Ukraine, even from European countries. Allies are now on track to deliver about a brigade's worth of aircraft. Ukraine needs well over 100. With that, they could stop the successful glide bombs Moscow is using to pound Kharkiv and other places in Ukraine. Those F-16s will be essential to Ukraine's offensive in 2025. The White House needs to decide now to arrange the transfer of that many F-16s with all the necessary avionics and missiles. Kyiv will choose the target of its next offensive, but Moscow's greatest achievement in his 10-year war in Ukraine is the seizure of Crimea. That's also his greatest liability because Crimea needs to be supplied via the Kerch Bridge and by the land bridge from Donbass, occupied Donbass, to Crimea. If we give Ukraine the necessary weapons, the longer-range fires, the artillery, the tanks, the airplanes, they can seriously disrupt, if not deny, supply of those weapons to Ukraine, forcing Ukrainian troops, Russian troops to retreat from South mainland Ukraine and posing a severe political problem for Putin. We need to do this. A strong policy to promote Ukrainian victory would not just involve sending the right weapons Ukraine needs, but we need to change our rules of engagements. Allow Ukraine to strike Russian tower targets in Russia, which are currently pounding Ukraine. Ukraine, again, Kharkiv is less than 20 miles from Russia. Russian forces are massed within Russia along the border. Russian airplanes flying in Russian airspace are pounding Kharkiv as well as Odessa. That's a different story. We need to allow the Ukrainians to strike back at them. We must also organize ourselves to meet the current security challenge. I have about 1 more minute. We need to ramp up our arms production. Arms, we learned in Ukraine that major power war is heavily arms intensive. We need that not just to help Russia lose in Ukraine, to help Ukraine defeat Russia, but so we can deal with a confrontation with China or Russia. We also need to be flexible in the way we run this war. We need a senior official responsible for overall coordination of our policy on this war, meaning ramping up arms production, meaning making sure Ukraine gets the weapons it needs, meaning making sure the American government can react promptly to changes on the battlefield. Our long obsolescence rule that Ukraine cannot use American weapons to strike into Russia should be gone now that we're watching what's happened in Kharkiv. Hopefully it'll change, but we need a senior administration official responsible for that. Finally, Congress. Congress has been strong pushing the administration to do more. It got the aid package passed. But we need greater flexibility in the way we appropriate for weapons. American weapons, even new ones, are facing challenges with electronic warfare in the battle space. We need to, in the appropriations process, agree to changes in weapons design to meet those challenges on the battlefield. All right, basic point. We've done this before. We defeated massive armed aggressors in World War II. We can do this now. Thank you.
Ambassador, thank you so much. And as we proceed, I'd like to point out that despite the fan club members of Mr. Cohen, that we don't want to have people harassed as they're coming into
Correct.
the building or into the room, and that anyone obstructing needs to know that obstructing the entrance is a fire code violation, and they will be removed. With that in mind, we now proceed to Secretary Michael Ryan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Chairman Wilson, Ranking Member Cohen, Congressman Veasey. I'm honored to testify today. Ukraine has a pathway to victory with our support. Kiev's challenge is simply this: how does a smaller force fighting for its survival defeat a genocidal Goliath? It's clear President Putin is in it to win it. He has no other option. Our strategic objective, therefore, must be a Ukrainian victory on Kiev's terms. To achieve this, there is much we must do. It is in our vital interest to do so. Together with our European and global partners, we must give Ukraine decisive advantages in munitions stockpiles, rates and ranges of fires, speed and skill of maneuver, air defense, air offense, and intelligence, while compensating for Ukraine's relative lack of manpower and Russia's resurgent defense industry bolstered by the unholy alliance of China, Iran, and North Korea. We must also find ways for Ukraine to hold Russian forces at risk wherever they may be. Time is of the essence. This summer may be decisive. By the fall, it could all be over. Therefore, we must rapidly adapt before it's too late. Strategic and operational success require that we do three things. First, clearly and publicly state our strategic objective, the defeat of Russia, so we can comprehensively plan for success and let Mr. Putin know he cannot win. Second, we need to substantially resupply Kiev in the next weeks to 2 months, or a Russian breakthrough on the battlefield is possible. Russia has the initiative. The 300-plus missile and drone attack on Israel on April 13th happens every week in Ukraine, but with greater ferocity. Third, we need to intelligently tailor our assistance to a specific strategy and plan that will bring victory to Ukraine. Ukraine cannot win on defense. It must take the fight to the enemy. Rapid resupply from our own stocks is an imperative on par with the 1973 resupply of Israel during the Yom Kippur War. We need to give Ukraine a Patriot battery now. This could be the difference between winning in the long run or losing this summer. Ukraine needs more weapons and better tactics. To provide the weapons, we should fully exploit the Defense Production Act and appoint a weapons czar to bring industry in line with our strategic objective. Russia's economy is on a war footing. Ours is not. We can help Ukraine help itself. American companies should partner with Ukrainian ones. Ukrainian warehouses are full of damaged equipment. American companies can repair this equipment. A specific strategy and plan for victory includes tactics, knowing how to beat your enemy. Tactics inform requirements. Combining existing methods in innovative ways can be decisive. To that end, former NATO Deputy Secretary General Rose Gottemuller and I wrote an article in Foreign Policy titled "Ukraine Has a Pathway to Victory" that lays out how Ukrainian forces can recombine existing tactics and technologies into a new scheme of maneuver based on our Cold War Joint Air Attack Team, or JAT, concept. As Russian forces move out from behind their prepared defenses, the updated EJAT, as we call it, is an ideal counteroffensive tactic to blunt and defeat their advance. To win, Ukraine needs localized and temporary air and electromagnetic superiority at points of its own choosing. Fighter unmanned aerial vehicles that can autonomously find and destroy Russian surveillance and attack drones could sweep the skies. Such systems should be rapidly developed and fielded. Ukrainian Wild Weasel missions for suppression of enemy air defense are already active using U.S.-provided missiles and would support the EJAT. The F-16 will enhance the effectiveness of this mission. The threat of Russian aircraft could be mitigated by UAVs such as MQ-9s armed with air-to-air missiles. European leaders are now suggesting that NATO air defense could help clear the skies in western Ukraine. Electromagnetic superiority is a thornier problem. The work under the DoD Electromagnetic Spectrum Superiority Strategy should be fully exploited. All this we must do and more. For the want of a nail, the horse was lost. If Ukraine loses, which they could very well do this summer, the very expensive and dangerous implications are that in his newly acquired position of strength, President Putin will not negotiate. Rather, he will push for total victory. His Air Force and Navy are largely intact, as are his strategic rocket forces. If Ukraine loses, tens of thousands of Russian troops will be on the borders of Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, and Romania. The Black Sea will be a Russian lake. Russia will no longer be fighting Ukraine and degrading its own capabilities, but instead their wartime economy will be restoring their strength, particularly in drones, cruise missiles, and hypersonics, which threaten all of NATO's European territory. Most destabilizing in the short term would be the 5 to 15 million Ukrainian refugees flooding into Europe. In the long term, the damage to U.S. and NATO credibility will affect the Middle East, Africa, and most importantly, Taiwan and the South China Sea. The entire global security dynamic will change. NATO's 75th anniversary summit is this July in Washington. Ukraine back on the offensive would be the perfect backdrop. Ukraine in retreat would not. China is watching. The world is watching. The choice is ours. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. Indeed, each of your statements, it's so refreshing. I agreed with everything you said. Okay, that I've never been to a hearing like that. It'd be interesting to find out now if people of another political party feel the same way. And so I'll refer to opening statements by Congressman Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know if I really need to do an opening statement. I would just as soon move into the 5 minutes and just do that now.
You see what a great team member he is. And another team member is here all the way from Indiana, and that is Congressman Victoria Sparks, Indiana by way of Ukraine. And so we're delighted to have Congressman Sparks here. And so we'll begin with the 5 minutes and hold everybody, beginning with me, to the 5 minutes. As indeed, your comments were so important, but my hopes for the people of Ukraine. When I was there in December before the invasion, it was at that time the planning was for resistance and guerrilla warfare. Well, the people of Ukraine have done so much better than that, and so just perceived that they could be overrun with mass slaughter. But the people of Ukraine stood firm, and so we need to be doing that. And then I appreciate indeed something that all of us have seen, and that is that we're talking about Ukraine, but it goes far beyond. And the implications are really clear. We've been together at the Narva River there in Estonia. And war criminal Putin one time by accident a couple of months ago, by accident said how much he really appreciated Narva. Yeah, he does. That's called NATO. It's called Article 5. And we need to avoid it. And then it's specific, as you were talking, and that is with Transnistria of Moldova, with Absession, Abkhazia of Georgia, he already illegally occupies other countries. With 4,000 troops in Armenia that are there for peacekeeping, they could be an occupation force. And so it just keeps on going. And so for people not to realize the implications of how far this could go, and so many of us, and you're going to see it, I believe, and that is it's bipartisan. I truly want Mr. Biden to succeed, and I'm glad that change of policy about the long-range missiles. I'm hoping for other policies. I hope for expediting equipment, and then I'm really pleased bipartisan. We had I was saying we'd get 300 votes for aid. No, it was 311. And so, Speaker Mike Johnson did a great job. And so over and over again, it's been bipartisan. President Trump himself placed Javelin missiles in Ukraine to try to deter this. President Trump put American troops in Poland, so historically significant. And President Trump is the one who warned Angela Merkel that Nord Stream 2 was going to finance the capitulation of Western civilization to Putin. But over and over again, we see coming together, and beginning with Nataliya, I would like your point of view as to the impact that you see of how important success for the people of Ukraine.
Thank you. I think 2 points on that. First of all, for Ukraine, this remains to be an existential war. And the choice is actually very simple, and it has never been just about choosing between Russia and the West. The choice remains about the way of life. And we see the two ways of life that Ukraine is choosing between on two sides of the front line. On one side, in Russian occupation, where you have atrocities on a daily basis committed against civilians, where you have extrajudicial killings, torture, deportation. And then on the other side, you have Ukraine that is free, unoccupied, and as imperfect as is, striving to be a better state every day. So what stands in between those two ways of life is essentially Ukrainian armed forces, supported by the population of Ukraine and its partners like the United States. So for Ukraine, the choice remains clear. I think there's a lot more at stake in this war than existence of Ukraine, as we discussed, including vital U.S. national security interests, but also the future of NATO. Because, as you know well, the Article 5 or NATO border are not magic shields. And NATO's decision-making depends very much on perceptions and assessments of individual member states, on credibility of other member states in the alliance.
You're here. And Ambassador.
Again, I agree much with what Nataliya said. The Ukrainian people have no choice. Yeah. Putin has made clear, and our intelligence agencies brilliantly picked this up before the big invasion, their intention to impose their vision of what Ukrainians should be, which is, to use a historic and not much appreciated phrase in Ukraine, little Russians, not to have their own identity as a separate people. We see this in the brutal war crimes that are being conducted in occupied Ukraine against Ukrainians who want to speak the Ukrainian language, who don't want to worship in the Russian Orthodox Church. So Ukraine has no choice. And the people understand that. And even though they are suffering greatly, they don't have an alternative but to fight on, because as the former leader in Kherson said to me 18 months ago, living under Russian bombs is bad, but living under Russian occupation is far worse. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So they're in this to the end, and they will win if we provide the necessary support, which, again, as all three of us have made clear, is critical to American interests. It's a smart way to deal with a rogue nuclear superpower. Beat him in Ukraine.
Here. And Mr. Secretary.
So I completely agree with the two other witnesses. I would just add, as an attacker, Russia has two choices because Ukraine is fighting for its survival. They can either capitulate or annihilate, and they're on track to try to annihilate, and therefore it's extremely important that we do everything possible now to prevent that from happening. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm really grateful that we've been joined by Congressman Jim Acosta from California, and I'm really grateful that we have with us Senator Richard Blumenthal, all the way from Rhode Island. So, that's okay. It's one of those assorted. Hey, it's one of those assorted northeastern states. Okay, they get confused. So aside from that, before I embarrass myself again, we'll proceed now, and we have beginning with Congressman Cohen.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me ask, we started off, first let me say what I think is a correct. Ambassador Herbst, did you say that Congress moved the administration along to get the security bill passed?
No, what I was referring to, they said that the bill that was passed encouraged the administration to send a long-range attack. Now, of course, the administration sent
No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the security package. I thought you said that Congress had done some things, and one of the things they did is they helped the administration get that. Regardless, the administration was for it. Congress was slow, and if it weren't for Congress, we could have got that done 3 months earlier. Okay, good. Pass with that on.
Y'all agree?
Yeah. Let me ask you this. We started off with sanctions. Do you think the sanctions worked?
I don't have any doubt that the sanctions have cost the Russian economy 2 or 3% of the growth per year, and perhaps a little bit less over time as Moscow has adjusted to it, and Moscow's palace has adjusted to it. What it has not done, of course, is force Putin to end the war. There's a lot of controversy about statistics regarding Russian economic growth. People say, quoting the IMF and the World Bank, say Russian economy grew over 3% last year. The problem with those statistics is it's actually based on Russian economics. And Russia puts out statistics designed to meet the political needs of the government.
Kind of like Hamas in Palestine saying how many children have been killed every week. Yeah.
UN ridiculously accepted as real.
Well, last week the UN said that they were not right, and there were about 5,000 people that they said were dead. They have no conclusion are dead, and that the
Correct.
children were greater number than ever. New York Times just hadn't picked up on that yet.
Indeed.
But anyway, so sanctions, do you think they've helped?
Correct.
Nevertheless, they were not the panacea. They didn't effectively kill the Russian.
But the advocates for sanctions were not saying they would be a panacea. They would say they would place an immediate and a long-term cost. Perhaps the most effective of the sanctions, although not as effective as we would like, have been the technology control sanctions. They have clearly made it much harder for Moscow to develop weapons, or rather to produce weapons which are effective. But of course, they're finding ways around it, especially with help from China.
And I agree with you. We need to allow Ukraine to use weapons to go into Russia. It makes no sense them coming and destroying all of the utilities, energy sources, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then Ukraine's got their hands tied behind their back. Putin's not thinking nicely of us. We give $60 billion. He's going to think, oh, but we let them shoot weapons into Belgorod or whatever it's called.
There's no doubt about that. We all of us agree on it. But I would just note that when the House finally passed the aid package, a lot of people in Moscow were unhappy, and they didn't hide it.
I'm sure they were unhappy. Now, let me ask you this. We passed the aid package. We need to get them weapons on the front line to protect Kharkiv and areas on their eastern front, but at the same time, we need to get them Patriot missiles and defensive missiles. Do we have any idea what's been prioritized and what hasn't?
Sadly, we're providing merely missiles for Patriot batteries as opposed to batteries themselves.
Oh.
I think, I'm not an expert on this, but I believe we have like 19 or 20 Patriot batteries ourselves. I don't know if we believe we can spare that. Some of those are protecting our troops in the Middle East, so that's work that has to be done. They need to be there. We know that some of our allies, who are not under any danger right now, have 1 or 2 or 3 which could be provided.
Yeah,
I think the
Romania
administration is
offers-
stronger pushing for that.
I think it was Romania offers some of their batteries, but it was one of the Eastern Bloc countries. But, Mr. Ryan, do you have any thoughts on that, about the ability to get them batteries or Patriot missiles, defensive missiles?
Yes, sir. The most important near-term thing we could do, Spain has a Patriot battery in Turkey. It's been there for a long time. We could get the Spanish to move that into Ukraine, and then we could put one of our batteries there, which helps us in the Middle East with the problem Ambassador Herbst was talking about. That we could do fairly quickly.
Thank you. Thank you. I just appreciate what has been done. Are you from Russia?
No, I'm not. I'm an American, and I grew up in Ukraine.
You grew up in Ukraine. Okay, well, there was something in there, your biography, that made me think about that, and I was just thinking about Vladimir Kara-Murza and how much he's still imprisoned, and we need to get him free, and it's awful. I mean, Russia just, thank you. You bet.
I don't want to ruin Congressman Cohen's reputation, but he was thinking about Kara-Murza, and I was thinking of Alexei Navalny. So there are brave Russians. And so with this, we now proceed to, and this is bipartisan, bicameral. And so we're so grateful to have Senator Richard Blumenthal, Connecticut. Y'all are familiar with that. It's the nutmeg state.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and appreciate your letting me ask just a few questions, and the courtesy of my House colleagues. Thank you for conducting this hearing. Thank you for being here. Each of you has very extraordinary knowledge and experience in this area. And I think you are united in the sense that we need to defeat Russia. Our own national security is at stake, and we ought to do everything possible. So I want to ask you about something unrelated to the arms. I think we need to do more long-range artillery, the F-16s, whatever is necessary to extend the field of battle even into Russian territory, so as to disrupt their command and their supply of weapons. And we need to do it quickly because obviously the offensive is coming. But there are two areas where I'd like you to comment. Number one, how effective have our sanctions been? On the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations in the Senate, we're doing an investigation of violations of sanctions, how countries like Uzbekistan, you're very familiar with that country, Mr. Ambassador, are potentially, whether purposefully or unwittingly, providing a means for sending semiconductors, parts, components that have been found in the weapons used against Ukraine. They've been found by the Ukrainians. Last time I was in Ukraine, I sat across from President Zelensky. I've been there 5 times and met with him over each of those meetings. And the last time, he handed me photographs, documents in a file on what they've found in terms of components and parts made by Americans in Russian weapons. And the second relates to financial resources that we could use, Russian assets. The Repo Act, you may be familiar with it, which endeavors to seize and use those Russian assets to support Ukraine. And whether there's more we can do to push our allies in Europe to side with us in this effort. I think they've been the reluctant party. Our government was reluctant for a long time, but I think they've demonstrated more resolve.
There's no question that there have been unusual changes, increase in trade between, say, Kyrgyzstan and Russia, some of the other Central Asian republics in Russia, Georgia and Russia, maybe Turkey and Russia. And they may well be explained by sanctions evasion. And so, yes, we need to have a very serious conversation with all the countries in question. Of course, with China, which apparently Secretary Blinken did a few weeks ago. And in fact, Chinese-Russian trade dipped somewhat in March and April, which may have reflected those efforts. But we need to do more, for sure, because Russia is not really high-tech in the way we are, and so they need those components to run their weapons. So we should do more. On the frozen Russian state assets, I agree with you. We need to do a lot more on this. I credit the administration, Dilip Singh, for his initiative, which is to allow the use of interest, 20 years worth of interest from the $300 billion of frozen state assets, so which Ukraine could receive $50 billion in the next few months if everybody agreed. Sadly, this is the U.S. position. I mean, good, it's U.S. position. My understanding is that London and Ottawa are also in favor of this, and the rest of the G7 are not. I know that Singh has been arduously pushing this agenda. I think he could use some help from the most senior members of the administration, starting with his boss, Secretary Yellen, but also the president. I think if we pushed hard, we might be able to persuade our allies to do this. I also think that this is an even better idea than the one that Dilip Singh is pushing. This is an idea associated with Philip Zelikow, Bob Zoellick, and Larry Summer to simply transfer almost all of that $300 billion to Ukraine. And there's a justification for this. And I know that there's interest in this elsewhere. But if we could start with this, what I call the Singh Initiative, that would be wonderful. And to the extent that Congress can encourage the administration to use its vast influence to persuade the allies, that would be welcome.
Thank you.
I would add on the sanctions part. I think the core question is how do we assess the effectiveness of the sanctions and whether we assess them on trying to affect Russia's intent to wage the war or Russia's actual capability to wage the war. And I think if we try to assess from the perspective of intent, that's not necessarily the most helpful metric because Russia's objectives remain maximalist. Very few things are capable of changing them. However, sanctions certainly degraded Russia's ability to an extent to conduct the war. Russia's defense industrial base and its ability to surge its production is not without constraint and it's not without limitation. I think the issue is that the sanctions are A, insufficient, second, a lot of it is cat and mouth as Russia adapts to the sanctions. So for them to be more effective, they have to be increasingly proactive and they have to be increasingly tied with other efforts, including the military campaign, including the questions of the global contested logistics and the question of Russian shadow fleet. So it's a question of proactiveness and comprehensiveness, but they certainly have effect on Russia's ability to sustain the war.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator. And
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
indeed, we have discovered a senator from Rhode Island. Okay, Senator Sheldon.
It's quite near Connecticut,
White House.
kind of our western suburb, in fact.
Hey.
I want to just tell my colleague from Rhode Island that I was mistaken for him.
Please, the states were confused because of the assorted northeastern states. We can't remember all of them, okay?
They're all so close together, right?
They're quite close. But keeping all this in order, somehow, indeed, we're delighted, Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, who's going to soon be the incoming co-chair of the OSCE, and what a northern gentleman he is, he's going to be deferring to Congresswoman Victoria Sparks of Indiana.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll try to make a brief statement, but my question is going to have quick 5 parts. So, I mean, from my perspective, we either didn't have a strategy or had a bad strategy because the situation tilted in the direction of Russia. You know, so in 5 items, I want to get your assessment where we are positive and negative on these 5 items related to Ukraine. You know, I understand Ukraine did a lot of changes. They changed generals, a lot of things happening. They still didn't put country in the war mode. Russia did. Ukraine didn't. Can you assess what's happening in Ukraine? Then United States. Obviously, we didn't give, the cluster munition for no reason. We also didn't really resupply, and didn't put our industry in the proper mode to be able to have, even if we plan to have long wars, which I don't think it's a good idea. I think decisiveness and speed benefits West much more. Then China, what's happening in China, your assessment where they are with this. They've facilitated this war for Russia. And Europe does a lot of grandiose talk, but generally all ends on grandiose talk and a lot of statements. And in the rest of the world in Global South, what's happening in Africa, Global South, and the rest of the world, what are dynamics right there? So in these 5 items, Ukraine, USA, Europe, China, Global South, and the rest of the world, if you can we can say maybe Mr. Ryan.
Thank you. Perfect. Clearly, they're all related. And as was said earlier, Ukraine, the situation there is the center of gravity for our interests and the interests of our allies and partners in Europe and in the Asia-Pacific region. Start with the Global South. They're watching. They're being played by both China and Russia, who are both trying to change the rules-based world order to one more favorable to autocracy. And they're offering autocracy as a better way to meet the needs of the people and ensure peace in the world. That's a narrative that we have to defeat. Defeating Russia and Ukraine will help us defeat that narrative. In Europe, the narrative has not taken place. Europe has transitioned significantly, as Ambassador Herbst said earlier, well beyond what we thought they would do. They are slow in getting things forward, but I would note the Germans are now putting together an initiative across Europe for air defense in Ukraine. So there are some positive signs coming forward. China is playing its own game, of course. They need Russia to be able to push their narrative around the world that they're the best form of government and everyone should be like them. Without Russia, that's going to start to fall on deaf ears and China's interests will be lessened. The United States, we're starting to come to grips, as we always do, slowly. But now that we're getting together on the same sheet of music, if you will, we have the opportunity to invoke our industrial might as we have in the past, because this next year on the ground in Ukraine is going to be an industrial competition between what Russia can do with Chinese, Iranian, and North Korean support and what we can do with our European friends. So we really need to move forward on that area. In Ukraine, as we all know, Ukraine has done a spectacular job. The beginning of your question, I think, was exactly right. We didn't start with a strategy. At first, we thought Ukraine would lose. Then when they started to win, we were late to need, and we weren't able to reinforce their success. That gave the Russians time to dig in. Then we just assumed that the Russians were going to be bad forever and the Ukrainians were undefeatable, and therefore the counteroffensive didn't go as planned because we didn't diligently get in there and tie our assistance to the strategy and the tactics employed on the ground. So now it's a moment of reset, and everyone is looking. So we need to reset correctly and go on the offensive as soon as possible. But in the very near term, we need to get as much assistance as intelligently as possible to the forces in Ukraine so that they can start to turn the tide.
So what if you would say what top 3 things that need to be done in the immediate term better? What needs to be done? 3 things, if you just...
We need to provide long-range fires for the Ukrainian military so that they can interdict Russian forces wherever they are, to include in the Russian Federation, in order to stop the destruction of Kharkiv and to regain the initiative. Because once Russia can no longer supply its troops and they can no longer sustain their command and control, in other words, Ukraine can destroy their headquarters, then the Ukrainian army is more motivated and better trained, and they will start to prevail. The next thing is provide air defense, because we need to protect Ukrainian cities and the Ukrainian population. And the third thing is we need to get in with the Ukrainians, provide a strategy for victory, one that's tied to our industrial support, our political support, our ability to marshal allies, particularly in Europe, to align the Europeans' effort to areas where we're not as strong as they are, and they can get in and do it as well. But also listen to our Eastern European counterparts, because they know the situation better than anybody, and they were proven right.
Right, I know the strategy not to lose. If you have, you might lose, but you'll never win. You have to have strategy and action to win. Thank you so much. Sorry, my time is expired, so I yield back.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman Sparks. And we now proceed to Senator Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island.
Thanks very much, Chairman. And while I'm here among so many House members, may I take a moment to thank all of you for seeing to it that the repo bill got into the supplemental. I know it's always a little bit of a challenge when House members have to put a Senate bill into something that they've been working on, but Chairman Wilson, you all should know, was an extremely powerful voice for getting that done, and a sponsor of the bill over on this side, so I just want to express appreciation to the House in general for achieving that, and to the Chairman in particular for his leadership and oomph to get that done. Ambassador Ryan, I'm delighted to hear you think that we would add strategic value to the Ukrainians as they find their way to victory, but so far we seem to have gotten most things wrong. So I hope that as we support the Ukrainians on their path to victory, we're a lot more humble about deferring to their good judgments rather than insisting on our own. We don't have much of a track record right now, beginning with that horrible, huge briefing over in the joint secure space here, in which every single member of the executive branch said they had 5 days to 2 weeks, and then it was all done. And there were people in the audience who didn't believe that. I was one of them, and sure enough, here we are. Remember it well. So I'm trying to, yeah, wasn't that an awful moment? So anyway, right now, I think a key focus is air defense. I'm not a defense expert, a strategy expert, a weapons expert. What do you think is the best place to go for a comparison between what Ukraine has and what it needs to provide its own Iron Dome equivalent, to be able to defend its territory from air attack most effectively? Is there some published resource that is best at that, or who should I ask? And if you know, just go ahead and give me the answer, but I suspect this is not the panel for that detailed question.
Thank you for the question, sir. I would suggest General Dave Alvin, the Chief of Staff of the United States Air Force. I used to sit beside him every day when we were stationed together at U.S. European Command. He gets it. Air defense is a layered, a multi-system approach.
Yep.
And therefore, at the high altitude, to intercept the most dangerous payloads that have the largest bang, PATRIOT is absolutely outstanding for that.
Yep.
Some of the European systems, including former Soviet-made systems like the S-300, all integrated together. So to have the launchers is necessary. To have the radar that can see through the clutter of the electromagnetic jamming so that they can then engage those targets is extremely important. And then ground-based air defense, so near into the targets to get that last mile. The way the Israelis do it, that would be Iron Dome. Then they have David Sling, that is the next layer out, and then they have the Arrow system, which is even further. And then we supplement that with our own assets. So it has to be layered, it has to be supported by outstanding radars, and it has to have an electromagnetic aspect to it. But General Alvin can give you the best answers on that.
I couldn't help but notice that when Iran rocketed Israel, a phalanx of allies was able to come together and pretty much knock every missile out of the sky. And that was a stark comparison to what Ukraine is experiencing. In your view, if 10 is best quality interception and defense capability against incoming artillery and missiles, where have we left Ukraine right now in terms of the equipment? Are they at 2? Are they at 4? Are they at 6? How big is the hole that we need to fill to protect their skies?
So the answer varies based on geography. Kiev is a 10. Other parts of Ukraine are a 2. And so it's the scope and scale, and what Russia has been doing is trying to get maximum effect in areas that have the least amount of defense. And so to have as Ambassador Herbst mentioned earlier, 9 Patriot batteries forward really is the way you protect the rest of Ukraine. It's like a hockey goalie coming out of the goal.
Yeah.
You cut the angles down, and then you can defend with less. And so we need to do that, but that means we need to have security forward, which means the Ukrainian army, as they push forward, we can push the air defense forward. And so it's that capability that we are after.
Did you notice the hockey goalie example for we New Englanders?
You
Coming right to us.
You and Tom Emmer can explain that
Right
to me
to us.
later.
Well, thank you all very much. I think if there's been one concern that I have had, it's that we've always been there to give the Ukrainians what they needed, and we've always been there 6 months late. And I hope that we can pick up our pace so that they're not crying for javelins and then crying for HIMARS and then crying for Abrams and crying for ATACMS and crying for 300s and now F-16s. Always there, always late seems to be our practice, and I hope we can fix that. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Hey, thank you so much, soon to be ranking co-chair. But very important, very perceptive as identification of the phalanx of countries coming together. One of those, incredibly enough, was France. And I was really grateful last week to be with the senator for the 80th anniversary reception at the French ambassador's residence. And it's an indication that all Americans should see how Europe is coming together. At the home is a huge copy of the Statue of Liberty. And on this, at the ambassador's residence, is also a Ukrainian flag. And so if people wonder about countries coming, Europe coming together, it's real, and we've had the opportunity to see that. Also real, I want to credit Congressman Marc Veasey for his being here first. Congressman Veasey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank the panel for being here as well. And I was hoping that you could give us some examples, because I think that this is important as we sort of move forward when we have to come back and ask for funding in the future. Can you provide some really specific examples of how the bipartisan foreign aid package that was passed, how it's already tangibly helped Ukraine against capabilities for Russia's unlawful invasion? Is there anything that is very tangible that we can take away and go back and share with constituents?
Tangible. There's no question that once the bill passed the House, right, before it became law, Ukraine began to reduce its rationing of ammunition and other weapon supplies. And it took another step towards reduced rationing after the bill became law. And the administration has moved, I think, almost as quickly as possible to get stuff out, which is they're still way in the hole because we're months behind, but they've done things. Beyond that, it's hard to say. Well, actually, there are two other points. The Russians were clearly deeply unhappy about this. They were sort of counting on this to continue. But this may have had a perverse impact on their operations. They see this as a window closing, and this may have persuaded them to push a little bit harder, especially in the Northeast around Kharkiv. But that's the only thing I can see.
Yeah, yeah.
I could
Yeah,
elaborate
please.
on that point. I think 3 additional points. So first of all, before the aid package was passed, actually we were in the moment where the range of possibilities was exceptionally wide, and it actually included the most dangerous scenario of Russia essentially putting Ukrainian forces on the path of collapse. So with the aid package being passed, that most dangerous scenario is not presently on the table, and it resets the range of outcomes that are possible in this war that still includes Ukraine's victory. I think secondly, more concretely, the aid package is also exceptionally important for Ukraine's ability to plan operations ahead. And third, it does matter also for Ukraine's ability to resolve its manpower issues. Ukraine has taken concrete steps legislatively and practically, but having ability to plan around a concrete aid deliveries will also help units who have limited capabilities to be able to relieve from the front and essentially participate in training. So it's also very important for the manpower planning component.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that's very helpful. Ambassador and Mr. Ron, I was hoping that maybe you could also tell us what sort of dangers or problems may occur for Russia's sustained use of Iranian and North Korean weaponry and technology in this conflict. I know that there's been some talk about that, and was hoping that you could shed some light on how that may further or how that could hurt us in the future if they're going to continue to use these weapons, and how that's given Russia or any of these other countries some sort of a military advantage.
Thank you, Congressman. Proliferation around the world of these types of weapons that contribute to instability in Africa, South America, and other parts of the world generally comes from North Korea and Iran. So by funding their arms production through Russian acquisition, the Russians are actually enabling their ability to be more disruptive in more places in the world, which creates a greater problem for us. President Putin early on decided, and this was in Secretary Ash Carter's memoirs, that he needed to oppose U.S. policy everywhere in the world and create as many problems for us as he can. Using North Korean and Iranian proliferation of weapons does that. We look at the domino effect of coups in Africa. It's directly related back to that Russian policy dictated by President Putin and as enabled by Iranian and North Korean shipments.
Yeah.
I would add that Iran has long sought more advanced Russian weapons technology, planes, missiles, and the Russians have been somewhat reluctant to do that. But Russia has been dependent on Iranian drones since month 2 of the big invasion. And this has enhanced Iranian leverage to, for example, maybe get the technology to start producing more advanced Russian jets in Iran. As far as I know, this has not happened yet, but this is, I mean, you can go to the intel community and find out where this stands. But this is certainly something Iran is trying to get from Russia, and for that matter, the North Koreans as well. When Putin went hat in hand for artillery from North Korea, a lot of which are proved to be duds, the North Koreans were also asking about ramping up their missile technology with Russia. I'm not sure the Russians have done anything yet, but again, this stuff is in play.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Congressman Veasey. And again, I want to recognize Congressman Veasey was the first person here. So that should be remembered. We appreciate. And as we conclude, it really is, I hope people see symbolically that what we have is, again, recognition from California with Jim Costa.
I want to thank.
I want to point out, he's with the Transatlantic Dialogue, okay? So he's very perceptive. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, my friend, and I appreciate your leadership, as was noted before, on these efforts. I think there's a lot of consensus here with what we're hearing, and I think learning the lessons of the last 2.5 years is what's critical for the purpose of the testimony here. And as we go forward, not to recount, well, if we coulda, shoulda, woulda, that's fine, but that's in the past. So my questions are directed toward the short term with the passage of this package and the longer term, and how we put together a concentrated bipartisan effort to support Ukraine. We've got 10 members of their parliament here this week. They are aggressively trying to seek support both on the short term and the long term, as we all should be doing. I've worked with two of you here before. We've gone to Ukraine several times, 3 times for me in the last 18 months. Just came back in February. My question is how do we focus on doing everything we can? The administration has been noted, has done the right thing, but oftentimes 3 and 6 months too late. This micromanaging, this tending to micromanaging Ukrainians' efforts from the West Wings has got to change. And I don't know what good advice you might have to suggest on how we do that in a way that doesn't politicize this thing, because obviously that will have other impacts that I don't want to see take place. So what would your priorities be? And Ms. Bugayova, why don't we start with you, in terms of recommendations to us in Congress in terms of short-term and long-term efforts and priorities. And I want to ask the same question with you, my friend, Ambassador Herbst. And I want to end with Mr. Ryan there on F-16s.
Thank you. To recap, I think there are concrete steps and also a change in approach that's required based on the lessons learned from the last 2 years. I think the concrete steps is providing Ukraine what it needs to help Ukraine restore ability to maneuver on the battlefield. That's the priority, which requires a lot more ground-based long-range strike capabilities. We discussed about denying Russia sanctuary space, and that's to the question of air defense that was asked earlier. No amount of Patriot batteries will solve the glide bomb problem that the Ukraine is experiencing right now in Kharkiv. Ukraine has to be able to strike Russian targets inside of Russia.
No, absolutely. I mean, this is they're offensive, they're the aggressor, and I don't see how you can conduct any legitimate counter strategy without doing that.
Yeah, and I would say that the final point in terms of the change of the approach, as we learned, the decision-making speed is a critical asset in this war, and I think it's for U.S. it's really important to be able to connect the ground truth to our capabilities and interest fast enough, and that requires expanding knowledge sharing with Ukrainians, including potentially expanding U.S. ground presence in Ukraine, recognizing that decision-making speed will determine the outcome of this war very much so as well.
Thank you. We'll follow up. Ambassador Herbst.
It would start with the administration wanting victory as a policy goal and deciding it was a critical interest of the United States to accelerate that victory. So when we talk about our campaign, when we talk to Ukraine about their campaign plans, and we follow the battlefield closely, we send them the weapons they need to achieve the objectives that we understand make sense to win this war quickly. You need to have someone at a very senior level in the administration, maybe even a special manager for the overall win the Ukrainian war effort. They make sure that the weapons that Ukraine needs are gotten there in time. We are looking proactively to how we can help with this, as opposed to waiting for simply Ukrainian requests. And they also make sure that we ramp up our arms production, which we've been talking about for 2 years and have not done much to do. We decide this is a priority for us. We will organize ourselves to win. And if that's what the Biden administration did with passing IRA, that's what happened with COVID under the previous administration, we can do this. And of course, we've won wars.
And the world has changed since February 24th, 2022. Correct. And we recognize that, and now we need to act on it. The Air National Guard in California has been working, as you know, my friend, for 23 years. We've been trying to coordinate this transfer and training of pilots for the F-16s. It has been slow, terribly slow. It looks like we have maybe close to 16 pilots trained. We need to fund these. The amount of the inventory of these platforms, I understand, is there. And so how would you offer the best way to accelerate this effort? My friends on our side say they would never urge a offensive like the Ukrainians tried last year without an air offensive. I mean, it was just crazy. We wouldn't do it. But yet we expected the Ukrainians to make a miracle out of this without the proper air cover.
Yes, sir, absolutely correct. First, I would say all of the above. If we do those things, then we're in a position to utilize the F-16s appropriately. The thing that underpins that, which we often miss in the debates, is the supply chains, the logistics, the maintenance, the repair of damaged equipment. All of that is part of a long-term strategy to make the F-16 a winning contribution to the war effort in Ukraine. And I know the California National Guard has been working that with the Ukrainians for a very long time. We have to do those things. As an A-10 pilot, I actually flew the F-16 once. It's easy to fly. It's very hard to employ it in a way that we employ it, in a very complex air scenario that supports ground maneuver. That's where we need to get the Ukrainians too, because you're absolutely right. Without that cover for their ground maneuver, they're not going to win. With it, they're going to win.